Welcome to the Strategic Leader podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant, and my co-host, Fiona Craig. This podcast is for HR professionals and people-focused leaders from any function who want to think, act, and feel naturally more strategic. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Strategic Leader. I'm Fi Craig and I'm sitting here with my co-host Gemma Bullivant. Hey Gem.
Hi there, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you Gemma. Let me ask you to kick things off today. What have you done in the last week or so that marks you out as a strategic leader?
Well, what comes to mind immediately is a call I had earlier today. In fact, I'm working on a pretty complicated reward strategy project where we're looking at incentives and the types of incentives that different populations need. And the ask of the project is a very strategic one, which is to think very high level and very strategically about what we need, what we've got, what we haven't got. And people on the call were doing the thing that we all fall foul of, which is getting really magnetically pulled into the weeds, into the detail, coming up with ideas on how to solve things. And I was having to notice and observe that and gently, but quite firmly pull people back into the strategic lens that we needed to have on that call. So that's my strategic muscle, very much well defined this morning on that call. How about you?
Well, I'm delighted to hear it. And there is definitely something around trying to answer the question before we've established that we've actually asked the right question, isn't there?
Yeah,
We
definitely.
don't like uncertainty, so we try and answer a question regardless of whether it's the right one. So I love
Yes.
that example. I've been strategic in a different way in the last week, which is that I've been doing kind of annual finances as a small business owner. I mean, actually, even in corporate life, it's the same. It never seems to be the most important thing on any day of the year. But I'm a bit fed up of being in that panicky situation each year. And I have decided to take a much more helicopter view to put processes in place, early doors, to put tracking and keep things up to date throughout the course of the year. So even though there was no deadline last week for me, I did a lot of work on making life easier over the next few months, and particularly for the end of the tax year. So I feel quite good about that because it's not what I usually do. I do normally have quite a tactical approach to finances, but not this year. So turning our attention to today then, Gem, we're a team, right? But we're not together. We're not in the same part of the country. We're not in the same room. And what we're going to talk about today is working in teams that are not physically together. We know this as hybrid teams. I'm sure everyone is totally familiar with this concept. You might have been familiar with it before 2020, but you'll certainly be familiar with it now. We have teams that are not physically together. We have teams that might not even be in the same time zone. We have teams, some of whom are sitting next to each other and some of whom are somewhere completely different, doing different tasks using tech. And how do we nurture and focus on building those relationships when we do have a hybrid team? We recognize the fact that the relationships between all the individuals in a team are the glue that holds it all together. The stronger that glue is, the more robust a team that you've got. But I think there's still some kind of sense that there is a reluctance to admit that this glue can be formed remotely. There is a sense, I think, still out there that we need to get people back in the office, that certain things can't be done unless we're together. Certain relationships can't be built unless we're physically together. And there's a real tension in the workplace, isn't there, between organizations that want to bring all of their staff back into work 3 days a week, 5 days a week, and workers who just don't want to go back. It feels like it's too long ago, doesn't it?
May I be allowed to step on my soapbox for just one moment?
Please do. We haven't had much soapbox action in recent episodes. Go on.
So I'm finding this debate very interesting and very intriguing, but also really quite frustrating because as you've said, we have had distributed teams in businesses long before COVID, long, long, long before COVID, and all the things that you've described and many more versions. I've worked in organizations where the teams are not co-located for whatever reason. And I think it is an absolute myth that we have to be in the same office in order to have a strong team culture.
Hmm. I agree.
And I really want that myth to be debunked and re-challenged and re-scoped in a different way for us to understand what are the relationships that we need, what are the systems that we need, what are the types of communication mechanisms that we need in order to function effectively. And we need to have some really honest conversations about what we need and what we don't need in teams, regardless of this debate of whether we should be in the office 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week or no days at all. And I do recognise the tensions. I do recognise the differing views. KPMG's latest CEO outlook seems to suggest that over 80% of CEOs are determined that people will be back in the office, which is quite a frightening
Isn't it?
opinion and standpoint, especially when we know that employees just don't want that.
No, there'll be a huge amount of resistance, won't there?
So, whilst all of that debate is raging on, why don't we take a little bit of time just to focus on how best to nurture relationships on the basis that teams are never really going to always be in the office? Because if nothing else, we're always going to have some level of hybrid, and lots of people have teams that are distributed anyway, regardless of whether we've got a return to office mandate or not. There, I'm going to set back off my soapbox.
Yeah, that wasn't. I didn't think that was too soapy. I'm with you. But I mean, I remember a long time ago. I've known you for a very long time. A long time ago, you worked with a team of people who were distributed across Europe, didn't you? And that makes perfect sense. We've had global companies for decades.
Absolutely. I had a European HR team, an HR person in about 8 or 10 different European countries. They were all in my team. Of
Mm,
course, we were distributed, we were not co-located. We had to find ways to build our team culture, build our communication channels, look and feel like a team.
mhm.
And I've worked in organizations that are managing sales forces, and of course, sales forces are typically on the road.
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
worked in organizations that have got different offices, and are located across the country or across the world. And so, this has been with us for a very long time. I think what's different is that teams that were in an office pre-COVID are now potentially not always in the same office. And so that's a change specifically for them that
Mhm.
needs to be considered and tackled. But that does not mean that it's a brand new thing for the workforce in general.
So my perspective on this as a team coach is that there are certain things that build team cohesion. There are certain things that unite a team and get them to work well together. And those things are common regardless of whether you work in the same office or whether you work in a hybrid
Mm,
fashion. I think we come unstuck when we neglect those things and we just
mhm,
do the work and we don't look at the team as an entity in its own right. We just focus on the work. We go through the motions of doing the work, but we've got nothing to rely on when the wheels come off in some kind of way, which they inevitably do in busy, high pressure environments. So, my perspective is there are certain investments that we need to make in how we work as a team. Doesn't matter whether you are physically together or not. I team coach in
mm,
person, I team coach remotely, and though they're all the same size on each other's screens, doesn't matter where they are, it's that intentional approach to how does this team work, and an agreed approach to how are we going to deal with certain things and how are we going to tackle certain things that's critical. That's the bit that's often missing. It's often missing in person, and it's certainly often missing when we go hybrid. But if we can take an intentional approach to looking at some of those things, and that can absolutely be done remotely, then our team just becomes stronger, more united, more aligned, better at communicating, better at delivering outcomes, basically better at creating high value for the organization they're in, regardless of where they're located. So I guess that's what we're looking at today, isn't it? We've got a couple of things specifically to look at that might help when it comes to building those strong relationships between members
mm.
of a team. So you have one to kick us off with, Jem, don't you? This is about where we are and what kind of work that we're going to be doing.
Yes, and there's a few different versions of this, but this was one of the earlier ones that I saw, and it's called the Gartner Intentional Collaboration in a Hybrid World. I think it was their attempt to help people in the post-COVID environment. It is dated 2021, but as I say, it's just capturing versions of how the types of tasks we work on and the types of ways in which we might work on those tasks. And it's a very simple 2 by 2 matrix. Love a good 2 by
We
2.
haven't had one for a couple of episodes, have we? This is good. It's good to have
No,
one
no, it's time for a 2 by 2. So I'll put the model into the show notes. But when we are in the office, there's two versions co-located. We're all in the same room and we are working together. So that means we are in a team, in a meeting situation, multiple people working on the same task, and we are all located in the same room.
So we're going to
Working,
be maybe workshopping something. We're going to be having a discussion about something. We're going to be most likely in a room around a table
yes,
with perhaps a screen in front of us or bits of paper in front of us. That's what we mean, don't we? We're working on something together.
it is. It's that classic team meeting or group meeting in a meeting room type scenario, for sure. The other one that's to do with being in the office is working alone. It's called working alone together. So effectively, you've got people sitting side by side, each on their respective desks, but they're doing their own thing. They're not working on the same task together. They may be working on something that's similar, but they are not collaborating on that task.
Mm-hmm.
That's the traditional sitting at your desk, tapping
Yeah.
away at your work,
Yeah.
or being on a call somewhere else. So they're the two in office or together type
So we're
scenarios.
physically together. We might be doing the work together or we might be doing the work alone, but we are physically together.
Correct. And then the other two are simply the ones where you are not together, you're remote. They call it distributed. The first one is working together apart. So again, it's like you're in a team meeting, but you're doing it on a Teams call, Zoom call, versions of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the fourth one is working alone apart. So the version of being at your desk tapping away at your computer, but instead you are somewhere else away from your desk, but still away tapping away at your own work task. Now, I really like this matrix because as you've started to do, you start to really think about where do we get the most optimized outputs, the best ideas, the best outcomes that that particular way of working is going to deliver for us. So you mentioned in the being together in a room,
Mm-hmm.
this idea of having, we might have flip charts or whiteboards, we might be
Post-it
pulling lots
notes. Love a
of
post-it
post
note.
all yes, and all of that where we're really thrashing ideas out in quite a collaborative way. And the energy in the room helps with that. There's obviously more social connection going on when you're in person, just naturally, where there's some chatting between sessions. But effectively, it is that being together in a room and the energy that we get from that and the outcomes that we get from that.
But having said that, and we can all picture that. I ran a session last week for a company. We were looking at organizational values. And the team that was about, I think maybe 8 of us in the call, they were distributed across the globe. So we had Singapore, we had Hong Kong, we had Denmark, we had Athens, we had New York. And we were on a Zoom call or something or other. And we were working in Miro, virtual whiteboarding tool. And we had flip charts and we had post-its and we had discussions and we had breakouts and we had laughs and giggles and we had little conversations going on between us. And we had people commenting on each other's stuff and we had some prattling about and we had some great ideas and some refining of ideas and voting and so on. The same stuff effectively, but we had that online. So that would be apart together. Is that right?
That that would be a part together. And
Yeah.
there's a couple of things about what you've just described there. One is that the people that were in that session were distributed across the globe. So it is fairly clear that to bring everybody together is quite significant,
Yes.
cost,
Yes, you're
time,
right.
and so on. So it forces the fact that a certain method is just the most viable, the most likely to get the outcomes that you need and want. So, first of all, is that. The second is that you've then referred to Miro and other types of tools where you accept that we're going to do this in a distributed way. Nobody's really in that situation debating the we should be all together for this. Let's wait until we're all together because
Yeah.
you can't wait. When somebody's in Singapore and somebody's in New York and somebody's in London, the waiting for you all to be together just isn't viable. Whereas if everybody could be in the same office and they just aren't for logistics reasons, so using that as an excuse and sort of saying we can't create the same ideas unless we're all in the office, therefore we're not going to do it. Therefore, it's either a source of frustration or it's a delay or there's another blocker in some way. And actually, it's quite flawed to say that you can't do it. You just have to find the tools and the mechanisms to do it in that way. And
Yeah.
I would imagine people knew how to use Miro, or if they didn't, there was a way of actually getting people able to use
Yeah. I mean,
something
I was
like
quite
Miro.
surprised because they hadn't used Miro or Mural, which did surprise me slightly. However, everyone was using it within 5 minutes. So, yeah, that wasn't a blocker, even though you might perceive it was. And actually, funnily enough, in that situation, I ran the same workshop in person for another part of their business when everyone was in the office. We ran exactly the same workshop, but we didn't get as much done in person,
Mm,
which was interesting. The same questions, the same prompts, effectively the same methodology because we were capturing
mm.
post-it notes and moving them around and so on, but we didn't get as much done. So even though we could do it in person, I actually, in that situation, think, well, actually, the rules of the game are a little bit clearer when you do it online. And
That's interesting, isn't it?
yeah,
That's interesting. And that leads to one of the other quadrants when we are apart alone, where effectively it's you on your computer sitting and working on a task without the need to work with anybody else. And I can remember when I ran a team and it was not that common to work from home, and therefore it was almost a sort of politeness of, "Could I work from home tomorrow?" Somebody in the team would
right,
come and ask permission, even though I was very happy for people to just pick and choose. We had a bit of an agreement that we needed to know where each other was, and the number one reason that people wanted to work from home was so that they could concentrate on something.
yeah,
Yeah. In other words, I need to get something done. I am more productive when I do this in my own space without interruption, and I can do that if I work from home tomorrow. I will get this report done. I'll get this analysis done. I'll get through my to-do list that I'm just not getting through, whatever it might be. The reason for working from home predominantly was I just need to dial up my productivity.
and there are certain tasks that are not suited to an office environment.
Mm,
They're not suited to an environment where lots of your colleagues are right there and can talk to you.
yeah. So we've talked about working together. That's the in the meeting room, all together, a group of people. We've talked about working together apart, such
Yeah.
as your session that you talked about. So we're all working on the same thing and we're all on the same meeting, but it's via Teams, Zoom, whichever. We've talked about working alone apart a little in terms of maybe somebody needing to dial up their productivity, disconnect from the interruptions in the office place. Working alone together is the fourth one. So that's literally I am working in the office. We're all together in the same office, but we're working separately on our own things. What do we think that enables in a business?
Oh, I can't help but think this is a trick question. I guess on the plus side, it enables you to overhear conversations that other people are having. That assumes that they're having them out loud or they're having them on the phone. So many conversations are on email, so you don't pick up what's going on in that case. But hearing what other people are working on, what stage they're at, what they're struggling with is a useful thing. the moments in between where you're walking to a meeting or you bump into someone in the kitchen or you're walking in or out. There's lots of positives around that. But
Mm.
equally, as I said before, there's huge potential to be interrupted. And like, well, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. We just sort of sit there and smile at each other occasionally and then go home at the end of the day. So it's a real mixed bag, I think.
Isn't it? And yet this is effectively what 80 odd percent of CEOs want. They want this. They want us all to sit at our desks, sat next to each other, on the off chance that one or two meetings might happen in the day, but obviously we could organise those.
Yeah.
Now, I do think it has its merits. So I mean, it wasn't really a trick question, but it was intentionally a little provocative because I don't think there are as many very obvious answers to that style of
Mm,
working than the other
mm,
three.
mm,
But I think what you mentioned there, those casual or impromptu conversations that happen, the things that may happen because you just happen to be in the same airspace as someone else and therefore overhear something. Those impromptu moments are really important to the cultural fabric if it is something that you can create, because of course we do have teams where you can't all be in the same office. But let's assume that for the teams that could be in the same office and there's this tension, this friction of pulling those teams back in, there's a real danger, isn't there, that we pull people in to do work that they could much better do at home. Because if everybody's got a mix of things to do, one of the risks is that people will come in, put their headphones on, and jump onto Teams calls with other people that they could absolutely do at home, would be happier to do at home, and would get the same, if not better, outcomes by doing at home. And I think we have to be really careful and really intentional about the type of work activities that we decide we are better doing and how. And that's why I like this matrix, because it does allow us to define that. But as a team coach, Fee, I know you've probably got some amazing ways to help teams to put that into practice, to enable some of that thinking to become the way that they want to work together. Have you got anything you could suggest?
Absolutely. One of the most basic and useful models that you can use is simply a team charter canvas. And we'll put a link to one of these. There's loads of them. You can just Google them and you can pull them off. They're basically a one-page summary of how we are going to work together as a team. And you create them from a series of conversations or from a day or two's lifting your head out of the delivery weeds and looking at the team as an entity in its own right. So, absolute core team coaching material. But we create the team canvas by asking ourselves questions like, what is it, big picture, that we're here to do? Like, most people answer that question in completely different ways. So we get one clear, united view of our shared purpose that's motivating and is standard, and we all buy into it. We look at the values. What needs to be important to us to work in this team? Is it important that we're all on time when we dial into meetings? Is it okay that someone hasn't prepared or that we haven't circulated something in advance, or is that absolutely not okay? Rules and activities. It's like we have an agreement that we are going to be in the office on these days. We have an agreement that we're going to do this kind of work completely separately and we're not going to disturb each other. We might have a rule that we don't email each other on Fridays. Some organizations have no email or no meeting Fridays or Wednesdays or whatever it might be. But these are agreed ideas that we put in place. On our team canvas, we can also put down the things that we know that we're really strong at as a team so that we can make sure we continually lead into those. We can also capture the things that we know we're weak at or the risks that surround our team so we can be constantly aware of them. Like, we know we have a weakness around finishing things as a team, for example, is a classic one that comes up a lot. So therefore, somebody is always going to say, hold on, folks, how do we wrap this up? Somebody's always going to say that. What are the next steps? And these are just agreements that we have. And actually, a lot of these things relate, as I said at the beginning, regardless of whether you are hybrid or whether you are in person. It's the same stuff you need to do. But what it means is, if we are hybrid and we don't have these conversations, the wheels can come off a little bit quicker than if we're in person. If we are hybrid and we do have these conversations, we can get the team working a lot slicker and a lot more efficiently than if we are in person. So I think these kinds of conversations, obviously from my perspective, it's the team coaching conversations. But even if you just download the team canvas or look at that Gartner matrix and just spend an hour or two with your team talking about it,
Mm.
intentionally deciding how are we going to do this? What are our agreed principles of how we operate? You will glue the team together a lot more efficiently,
Mm.
regardless of whether you're hybrid or not. But particularly if you're hybrid, everything will be a lot smoother.
That's great. And to add to that, I suppose, not only figuring out what you do and how, but also I would say spend just a little bit of time on why. Why is it that we think being together in the office for that particular task is going to be a better outcome? Because I think, in particular, this tension of coming into the office or staying at home feels like it's a quite a personal tension for lots of people. So,
Yeah.
from a psychological perspective, I think it's worth enabling people to understand the benefits or at least understand your thinking as to why it's important to you that people are all together or in the office, because otherwise they're going to just sniff a bit of a rat and just think it's a ploy or a mechanism to get people back in the office, and you'll lose sight of the benefits of why that particular way of working is preferred and therefore agreed in the charter.
I really like that. And it really has reminded me of something. It was a good while back, but we were a team that had a team meeting at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. And we were all in person in the office. But we started the week with a team meeting at 9 o'clock. You're pulling a horrified face. I imagine everyone is like, can you imagine starting the week with anything worse? But no matter. What we realized is that it really took us a good half hour to just even relax in each other's company on a Monday morning. It just took us ages. We said, well, why do we even have this team meeting? Can we not have it remote? Because even in those days, we were thinking of different, more efficient ways of doing it. But somebody had shared, why are we doing it together? Because they wanted us to be really frank and honest with each other. And it was felt that we could do that better in person. And whether we could or not, I'm not sure. But because they'd shared, we want this to be a really frank, really authentic, really candid conversation. Somebody had shared, that's why I want us all together, because I want this meeting to be like this. So it's not to say that we couldn't have done that remotely. We could have done, but it's that intentional approach to what do we need from each other in this interaction? And what's the best way of setting it up for success?
Absolutely. And I think, leaning into that question of why is one of the strategic muscles that we need to remember to flex. Because if we simply use the Gartner approach and have some chartered agreements between us as a team, we're still in quite a transactional space. We will be operating more strategically in a more enhanced way, but we're really not tapping into the strategic reasons as to why that is in place unless we ask that question why. So at least what you've just described there, that has actually added a layer of understanding.
Mhm.
It could be something that people challenge or not, or buy into or not, but it is
Yeah.
adding another layer.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Jem. It's one that goes around many times, doesn't it? And there is no clear answer, but being able to flex across all four of those quadrants is really critical to be able to working in a team, whether that's formally your team or just a group of people.
Yes, and so whilst those CEOs and leaders are thrashing that whole debate about, I would urge you to take some proactive steps on how you can lead your team in the most effective way, using those four ways of working, using a bit of a team charter approach, really interrogating why different methods are preferred for what different reasons, and helping our teams to understand that and work more effectively with each other.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you for listening. Drop us an email or contact us on LinkedIn if you want to let us know your thoughts on this subject. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much, Jem.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to access more of our recordings. And if you think it'd be useful for someone else, please forward to them and leave a review. We base our content on questions we are regularly asked and what you want to know more about, so please do email us with any questions or comments to gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk. And remember, you're already being more strategic than you realise.